समझ नहीं आ रहा अपने सैलरी इंक्रीमेंट का क्या करूं।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स के एसआईपी का टॉप अप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
क्या? समझ में नहीं आया।
बेटा इतना क्या सोच रहा है? अपने म्यूचुअल फंड्स का एसआईपी टॉपअप करा ले। दिस इज द राइट टाइम।
अब समझा।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme related documents carefully.
The platoon found its officer when the terrors of the night ended. He'd been castrated and flayed, probably while alive, and his skin lay pegged out on the rocks not far from camp, the soldier and novelist John Masters later wrote. They never took prisoners, but mutilated and beheaded any wounded or dead who fell into their hands. Enraged ethnic Pashtun women, Masters wrote, sometimes joined in. I quote, they would torture prisoners with the death of 1,000 cuts, pushing grass and thorns into each wound as it was made. 100 years after the British fought their long, savage counterinsurgency campaign to control the Afghan borderlands of their empire, Pakistan finds itself flailing in the face of yet another war that will not end. Fatalities have surged to record levels, driven by an intense wave of attacks not just by the Balochistan Liberation Army, but also a resurgent jihadist movement in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Leaders, both civilian and military, have been promising ruthless retribution for these attacks, as they do every time there's a problem. In this war, though, the Pakistani state cannot and will not win unless it abandons the principles of colonial counterinsurgency, which have coated its institutional thinking like some toxic sludge. Addressing the insurgency needs troops to provide security, but it also requires creative political and economic engagement. The Islamic Republic of Pakistan's Praetorian Guard, its army, has repeatedly shown itself incapable of conducting such a project. For the empire's strategist, historian Andrew Waters has shown, the counterinsurgencies they fought posed an intractable problem. Here, small ground forces deployed to punish marauders or rebellious villages attracted large numbers of hostile tribesmen, which required large, expensive relief expeditions with concomitant vulnerable lines of communication to relieve them. To be positioned to send out relief expeditions meant maintaining garrisons with roads or railway lines to supply them. And those lines of communication, in turn, needed troops to protect them. The first 30 years of British rule in the northwest, what's today Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, historian Elizabeth Kolsky records, saw more than 40 punitive expeditions in which crops were destroyed, livestock slaughtered, and entire villages burned to the ground. The punitive expeditions were officially cast as, and I quote, measures required for the establishment of a strong rule and a peaceful border in countries which never before have known law and order. Thus, each short, sharp campaign to punish rebellion turned into a military expedition whose costs simply could not be justified. The empire did indeed need to stabilize its border with Afghanistan to protect itself from rival imperial designs, but it needed to do so without bankrupting itself. Fundamentally, warfare is about geography. Khyber Pakhtunkhwa sprawls over 101,741 square kilometers, and Pakistan's largest province, Balochistan, is spread over almost 350,000 square kilometers. Figures for Pakistani military deployments in these areas are hard to come by. Still, a granular study by the scholar Zahid Ali Khan estimated that Pakistan committed some 140,000 Army and Frontier Corps personnel to the borderlands during its major counterinsurgency operations of 2009-2010. Now, 140,000 troops might sound like a very large number, but it's not. To secure the line of control against infiltration and to fight jihadists operating inside Kashmir, India uses around 320,000 troops, not counting the close to 100,000 central police personnel. Jammu and Kashmir has an area of just 42,241 square kilometers, less than half of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa alone. From the war of 1947-1948, right after independence, Pakistan Army strategists learned that irregular warfare could help them tie down large parts of India's numerically superior army and sap resources that would otherwise be available to India for offensive use. Today, however, they're also discovering that this sword cuts two ways. Facing an economic crisis, Pakistan has had to increase defense spending, which Muhammad Luqman and Nicolaus Antonakis show is hollowing out the country's human development. Even then, the army was unable to ensure the basic elements of order in its massive borderlands. Large parts of Balochistan's road network, journalist Imtiaz Baloch recently reported, are under the control of either insurgents or bandits. The simplest answer would be to pump in even more troops. But Pakistan can't do that without incurring huge costs and significantly weakening its defensive posture on the line of control in Kashmir. The empire's planners faced precisely the same problem, and they thought they had a solution. From the 1920s, the Royal Air Force began to advocate for the use of air power to address the empire's many insurgencies, stretching from Iraq to India's northwest. Air Marshal Sir John Salmond suggested that bombing from the air could, I quote, knock the roofs off huts about and prevent their repair, a considerable inconvenience in winter time. It can seriously interfere with ploughing or harvesting of vital matter, or burn up the stores of fuel laboriously piled up and garnered for the winter by attack on livestock, which is the main form of capital and a source of wealth to the less well-settled tribes. In other words, he was talking about slaughtering innocents. To imperial strategists, it appeared that this kind of use of indiscriminate force would cow rebels into submission. And this without the enormous resources that ground expeditions demanded. Fighting the rebels led by Haji Mirza Ali Khan Wazir, the Fakir of EP, the air campaign often targeted the villages from which his insurgents had originated. Fresh from 3 months' leave in England, historian Andrew Rowe records, a Sergeant Albert Holloway of the 60th Squadron fired off hundreds of rounds into one village along the Tochi River. Later, he flew multiple sorties over Bhitani using 20-pound and 112-pound bombs to destroy tribal livestock. Cattle dispersed with casualties, his log entries read. Camel and sheep dispersed. Leaders of the tribal Lashkars, not surprisingly, adapted to this new means of warfare though. Large groups began to move at night when they could not be detected by the air surveillance of the time. From the mountain tops, tribal marksmen also became adept at shooting down low-flying aircraft. The fate of captured pilots was often a very unhappy one. The RAF was compelled to issue what came to be known as goli chits, goli being the Persian word for ball, promising large cash rewards if the captured pilots were returned without being castrated. A beer-drinking song in a mess summed up the ghastly prospect, Graham Chandler writes. No balls at all, no balls at all. When your engine cuts out, you'll have no balls at all. Even the brutality of the air campaign, though, did not secure Waziristan for the British. The historian Sana Haroon notes that the British ultimately secured tribal complicity with their project through large increases in allowances in Waziristan, from about 130,000 rupees in 1919 to about 280,000 rupees by 1935. In addition, some 1.9 million rupees were paid out for the Khasadar scheme, which armed and funded local militia raised by the tribes themselves. The Fakir of EP notably was never caught and lived on in Pakistan despite loudly voicing his trenchant opposition to partition. There were plenty within the empire's strategic establishment who understood that there could have been better ways to bring peace to the northwest. Expanding and securing trade routes through the region, for example, could have given the tribes access to revenues, freeing them of the need to raid the plains in times of agrarian distress. Efforts to build an alternative agricultural economy might have taken time, but it would have likely proved durable. Little imagination is needed to see why an empire didn't care to build a polity and a state that can endure. Less explicable, though, is the Pakistani state's disdain for its own people. The northwest borderlands remained the most backward regions of Pakistan, systematically denied investments in infrastructure and education that have allowed regions like Punjab and the big cities to progress. The army, for its part, has chosen to rule through jihadist proxies and tribal chieftains instead of allowing modern democratic politics to grow roots. This crisis shows us that a breaking point is coming. Further barbarism can defer its arrival, perhaps, but it will risk dragging Pakistan itself to a point of no return. I'm Praveen Swami, and I'm a contributing editor to ThePrint. Thank you for watching this episode of Security Code.